In the dead of winter, when the snow turned the world white and the wind froze even the boldest hearts, a wounded woman stumbled into a quiet ranch town, her newborn in her arms, her past at her heels. What happened next would break the silence of an entire community and test the courage of the only man who dared to save them. In the winter of 1964, when the northern plains lay buried under a merciless blizzard and the world seemed carved from ice and silence, the small ranching town of Elkford was settling into another long night of snowstorms when everything changed, because just before dusk, as the last orange light sank behind the frozen ridge, a woman emerged on the horizon, stumbling through waist-high snow, clutching a newborn wrapped in nothing but a thin wool blanket, her face ghost-pale from frostbite and fear, her breath sharp clouds in the frigid air, and the townsfolk watched from behind frosted windows, whispering rumors, afraid to open their doors, as if the blizzard had spit out a ghost. But inside the warmth of Miller Ranch, the most isolated homestead for miles, a man named Caleb Miller, rugged, quiet, known for strength more than words, stepped outside to bring in firewood and froze when he spotted her crawling toward the corral fence. And without a second thought, he ran through the storm, boots breaking ice, coat whipping like a torn flag. And when he reached her, she collapsed against him, whispering, "Take my baby. Let her live." Before her eyes rolled back and she went limp against his chest, Caleb lifted both mother and child, feeling how frighteningly light they were, like the storm had hollowed them out, and he carried them inside while the wind screamed after him, slamming the door as if furious that he had stolen something from its grasp. He laid the woman, later, he'd learn her name was Evelyn, onto the old ranch couch near the fire, checked the infant whose tiny fingers grasped the air with desperate need, then wrapped them both in thick blankets, rubbing warmth back into cold skin, while the storm battered the walls like the fists of angry spirits. Outside, the distant sound of horses and wagon wheels echoed faintly, too faint for normal travelers, too steady for neighbors, which told Caleb there was a reason the woman arrived half dead in a snowstorm, and whoever she was running from wasn't far behind. Hours later, as Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness, she finally whispered, broken truths between tears. The child wasn't wanted by the people she escaped. The father powerful, dangerous, a man who ruled a nearby town through fear, and she had fled in the night when he threatened to take the baby away forever. And the storm had nearly claimed her until Caleb found her. When she asked if her baby girl was alive, Caleb placed the newborn in her trembling hands and said, "She's strong. She's fighting." And Evelyn sobbed into the child's forehead, her tears freezing before they fell. But soon the sound Caleb feared came. The crunch of wagon wheels, approaching through deep snow, and he looked out the frost-covered window to see lantern lights flickering like predatory eyes in the storm. He recognized the crest painted on the wagon's side and felt his gut twist. It was the Dalton family brand, symbol of the violent clan that ran Bitterwood Falls, a place known for lawlessness and cruelty. If they were here, they weren't visiting, they were hunting. Caleb doused the lamp, lifted Evelyn and the baby once more, and moved them to the hidden cellar beneath the barn, a place his late father had built in darker times, and he whispered, "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Then he closed the cellar door just as 3 Dalton riders dismounted, stomping through snow like wolves on the scent, shouting that they were searching for a stolen child and a runaway woman who belonged to them. Caleb stepped out into the storm, tall, broad, and unflinching, and told them no one had passed through in this weather. But the Daltons didn't trust him. Few men ever dared stand firm before them, and they pushed past him, forcing their way into the barn, kicking through snow and slamming open stalls while Caleb stood still as stone, ready to defend 2 fragile lives hidden beneath their boots. One Dalton brother paused, listening, staring at the floorboards as the newborn below gave the softest whimper, and Caleb's heart nearly stopped. But a sudden howl of wind rattled the windows so violently that the sound was swallowed, and after tense minutes the riders left with threats to return, leaving deep tracks in the snow that chilled Caleb more than the storm. When he pulled open the cellar, Evelyn gasped with relief, collapsing into his arms again, whispering, "Why would you risk yourself for us?" And Caleb only shook his head, saying, "Because no one should face a storm, human or winter, alone." And as the blizzard raged into the night and the fire crackled low, The three of them, fugitive mother, newborn child, and silent rancher, waited for dawn, not knowing that the next day would bring the entire town, whispers of scandal, and a choice that would change all their lives forever. By morning, the snow had piled high against rooftops like the world had been buried under white silence, and as pale sunlight struggled through the storm clouds, Caleb knew the Daltons would return with more men, maybe even the sheriff they controlled, so he saddled his mare, bundled Evelyn and the baby in thick blankets and guided them toward town, hoping the community of Elkford, though small, might stand with him if danger came. The ride was slow, each hoof crunching through ice as the wind stung their faces, and Evelyn held her baby against her chest as if shielding her from every cruelty she'd ever known, whispering lullabies through chattering teeth. But when they reached the town square, people stared from doorways and frosted windows, murmuring, judging, uncertain, for gossip traveled faster than snow, and word had already spread that Caleb Miller, the quiet rancher, who never meddled in anyone's affairs, had brought in a strange woman and a baby in the night. Some townsfolk stepped forward in kindness, offering blankets and warm milk for the child, but others whispered that trouble would follow them, that the Daltons would burn the town to ashes if they didn't return the mother and child. Caleb ignored the murmurs and carried the baby into the doctor's clinic, where old Doc Hawthorne examined the infant, declaring her stronger than expected. A fighter, but Evelyn was weak, her body battered by cold fear, and months of abuse she barely spoke about. And when Caleb held her hand, she looked at him with exhausted gratitude, saying, "I don't want them to take her. I'd rather freeze out there than let them touch my baby." Caleb promised he wouldn't let that happen as long as he was breathing. But as they spoke, the thunder of horses echoed down the snowy streets. The Daltons had arrived, more than a dozen riders armed, angry, frost clinging to their coats like death itself. Their patriarch, Silas Dalton, a towering man with a scar across his cheek and eyes colder than winter, dismounted and shouted for the woman to be brought out, accusing her of stealing his blood since the child was his. Conceived under circumstances he twisted into lies, and he ordered the townsfolk to choose between handing her over or facing his wrath. The street fell silent, snowflakes drifting like shards of glass in the wind, and for a moment it seemed no one would defend Evelyn, until Caleb stepped out, holding Evelyn with one arm and lifting the baby with the other so the entire town could see, standing between the Daltons and the clinic like a mountain against a storm. And he shouted, "This woman doesn't belong to you, and this child isn't property. If you want them, you'll face me first." And his voice carried through the freezing air with a courage that made even the wind hold its breath. Silas laughed, but not with humor, with cruelty, as he motioned his men forward. Yet to everyone's shock, several townsfolk stepped closer to Caleb, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, 2 ranch hands, even old Doc Hawthorne, each holding whatever they could, shovels, axes, a rusted shotgun, forming a line behind Caleb. The Daltons hadn't expected resistance from a quiet town buried in snow, and tension crackled like lightning on frozen branches. Evelyn clutched the child tightly, tears streaming down her raw cheeks as she whispered, "You don't have to fight for me." But Caleb looked back at her and said, "I'm not fighting for you alone. I'm fighting for the world your daughter